All right, welcome back, everyone. Today is a day where I've been itching to talk about this story. This is one of the stories. It seems simple on the surface, but I will be sharing with you the opinion of one of my professors of the interpretation of this story, which brings in some of the commentary that I've kind of been alluding to all along. This is one of the stories where whose version of the story is accurate. So with that in mind, let's jump into 1 Samuel chapter 25. So the first verse of 25 is not a part of the story, but we get the notice that Samuel has died, which will
Yeah,
be
yeah.
important later to know that Samuel is old enough. He is passed away now. So any thoughts on this before we jump into the big story for today?
Well, nobody seems to know. I mean, nobody knows that David has been anointed. Is that accurate?
I
David knows.
mean, some people do. It seems like some people know and some people don't, but it
Okay. All right.
all right. So let's jump in. Oh,
Excuse me,
yeah,
that
no, go
I
for it.
had my hand on me. This passing note about Samuel seems kind of uh, to diminish him. That like he was really important, and he's gone. I don't feel like it's a very, I would like a little bit more. Oh, Samuel, who did all this, is gone, and now.
It's Saul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Clay.
the
Oh,
note
it's
in my
Samuel.
the note in my Bible
Oh,
says
it's Samuel,
the
not Saul.
brevity of the
Okay.
obituary is
I thought
surprising.
Samuel died
Wait,
before. Okay.
no, Samuel hasn't died yet. Clay, I didn't hear the end of what you said.
The note in my Bible says the brevity of the obituary is surprising.
Ah.
So that goes right with Gretchen, like, what?
Mhm.
hmm So this is one of those where there is a story coming up where we know Samuel is gone. If I was to hazard a guess, they there was a version of this book that did not include a note that Samuel died. So they had to put it in somewhere. And so there evidently it wasn't a very there isn't the pomp and the circumstance. I mean, if you think of the way the initial story of how Samuel was called in the middle of the night and you have this long drawn out call process, it does seem very weird that it's like, oh yeah, he's dead, just by the way. And we mourned him. And that's all you need to know. It does seem asymmetrical. But believe it or not, he is not out of the story yet. So, with that in mind, let's jump to the big story for today. So, this is a story of David, his 400 men. So, remember, he has like his group of people that are like the disaffected people from society that are traveling around with him. David's kind of like jumping in the desert trying to elude Saul. And he comes upon Nabal and his wife Abigail. And so we're going to talk about the story first as the story is presented to us, and then we're going to relook at the story from a different perspective. So, what do you all see as the major crux of the story? Where is the conflict here?
Nabal is presented as a really pretty nasty person, and he
Yeah.
doesn't want to help David at all, whereas his wife Abigail seems very sweet,
Mm-hmm.
and she brings food,
Yeah.
which David had asked for.
The conflict seems to be about whether or not he should kill everybody. And
Right.
in punishment for um, not giving them food after he and his men had been nice to them during recently and
Mm-hmm.
protected them apparently. Um,
Yeah.
Going
So
on and just wiping people out for doing something like that just seems to be standard stuff.
hold on to the interpretation here. Let's
Okay.
talk about what's happening so we can puzzle out what's going on here.
Okay.
So we have David and his men as seen as the good guys in the story. Nabal or Nabal, I'm actually not quite sure how this one's supposed to be pronounced. Nabal, Nabal. He is depicted as a grumpy guy and not a good person. So what does Nabal do or not do here?
I think it may foreshadow a little bit of the reaction of King David to anybody who dares to be not in favor of him. It's a little bit of overreaction, in my opinion, of David to this truly unpleasant person. But I'm thinking, well, in the future, you better watch out. You better be nice to David.
So we have David as kind of a hothead as well. So what starts off the conflict here? I don't think we've actually gotten to the point of like what does Nabal actually do that sets David off?
Oh, he says he refuses David's request for food and so forth, that these 10 people have come and asked apparently for enough food and stuff to feed David's army. And Nabal says, well, who's this David? I don't know who he is. I'm not going to give him anything.
Maybe that was the crux of it. He didn't know who David was.
Yeah.
So there's a few aspects going on. So now that that is the center conflict. David is asking for a feast. Nabal says no. So why would David go to Nabal specifically asking for a feast? There is a reason given of why he chose this person.
Well, Nabal's got a bunch of sheep shearers there, and it's some sort of holiday.
Yeah.
So David knows he's going to be feeding a lot of people anyway. So he's got a lot of food and stuff. I'll go get some from him.
Yeah. Gary, did I see a hand?
Yeah, there was also it was implied that David's group had been protecting the area for extensive period of time, and the shepherds were at ease when they were around, and so he was kind of trying to collect on that as if it was a debt.
Okay, so hold on to that thought of David providing protection. We're going to circle back on that. We're not going to focus on it yet, but hold on to that thought. So there's sheep shearing going on. There's a feast day coming up. There is a line at the very beginning that is important. And it's in verse 2. There was a man
was very rich.
Thank you, Gretchen. This guy is loaded. On two sides, like there's two aspects of it. This guy has a lot, but also that probably means he is the most able to feed 400 men.
He's also a Calebite, at least my version, uses that word. What does that mean?
So Caleb is a character from the book of Judges. Is it Judges?
Caleb, one of the people who went into the promised land.
Thank you. Not Judges. It's from Numbers. So B, I don't think you were with us in this study, or for this part, but if we go back to Numbers, there's the point where they have just come out of Egypt. They have gotten the 10 Commandments. They have gotten all of Leviticus. And this is before the 40 years of wandering in the desert. Moses sends up spies to look in the land of Canaan to check out the land. And if you remember, all the spies came back and they're like, this land is filled with giants, but also look at these giant grapes. And this land is fertile. It's great, but the people are terrifying. And Caleb is the one that's like, yeah, we should go. Let's conquer. We're ready. And everyone else is like, no, we're scared. We don't want to do this. This is terrifying. And the punishment for the people not being willing to go into the promised land is the 40 years in the wilderness. So Caleb was the one enthusiastic person who wanted to do this. He is a descendant of that person, and evidently the stereotype that evolves out of this is that the Calebites are gung-ho about violence, basically. That kind of gung-ho attitude makes them the negative aspects of Nabal are associated with being a descendant of Caleb.
Oh.
Hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That I have to say, I had to look that up because, yeah, that's the first time I had ever seen the word Calebite, and I'm like, what? Anyways, so we have this guy. He's kind of grumpy. He's kind of stingy. He's rich. And David sends 10 men to say, hey, can you feed us? What do we think of David's request of, hey, I hear you have shearers. There's a feast day coming up. Can you feed my men? Is this a reasonable request?
I don't think so.
No?
Well, he thinks so. When you said he said I provided protection, it sounds like the protection rackets of the gangsters, where you had to pay to get protection from thugs.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Because it never says that David actually protected these sheep. It just says he did. So, once again, hold on to that thought. That's actually my professor's interpretation. Anyways, we're going to hold on to that. So sticking with the narrative as David's PR team probably wants to present it, he says, hello, I have provided protection for you. No wild animals have come up. No bandits have come up. Can you feed my 400 men? Is there something that about the culture at the time that we have seen before? Think of stories of like Lot entertaining the angels or travelers in this part of the world. Is there a cultural custom that would make this a reasonable request?
Yes. Yeah. You feed the stranger, you give them water because it's a dangerous place to be, especially near the wilderness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of like in other parts of the world where somebody comes around dinner time and we always sort of hold off. Well, what shall we do? They're here. What do we? And they say, "Well, come on in. It's dinner time. You're here. Let's eat. Whatever we have is yours."
So
But there's 400 people here. And
yes.
400 people to be fed.
So one aspect that David is evoking is the rules of hospitality. In this part of the world, hospitality reigns supreme. And so the thing is, David is doing this around a holiday feast, but it could be seen as he is evoking the rules of hospitality of, hi, we are people in the desert region. I know you have enough food because look, you're shearing your sheep. I know you have food. I'm evoking the rules of hospitality. Feed my people. So with that lens, how does it look when Nabal says, no, I'm not going to feed you with the rules of hospitality?
It's just counterculture. It's not. It's a bad way to behave because your culture says you feed people, and I think you can't help but picture all those sheep being sheared. I mean, oh, look at all that meat just on foot, but still. So I think feeding 400 a piece of cake when you got all these sheep that you're, shearing. You go someplace and you shear a lot. But it was not a good answer, and it's interesting to why he did that. What's in that? Why?
So other thoughts on Nabal saying no to the rules of hospitality?
That's one of the reasons Nabal is rich. He doesn't like to give his stuff away.
That's right.
So, yes. So,
Yes.
we're doing some reading, not for this, but otherwise, I've been learning a little bit more. And I think I've talked about this before at some point. One of the things that is built into the worldview of the people at this time is they had a zero-sum mentality, meaning that there is a pie and everyone gets a piece of the pie. And if someone is rich, that means they are taking from someone else.
Mhm.
And it is
Still true, by the way.
I mean, yes and no.
Sorry.
I would argue we live in a world that has enough food, so if people are hungry, that means it's just not being distributed well. In this world, in a way, to have a lot means you're taking directly from someone because this is an arid landscape and it only grows so much food. There's not fertilizer fertilizer in the same way that we have. They would use manure, but they don't have chemicals and insecticides and all of that stuff. And so this community lived and died together. It had a much more communal sense. So for Nabal to say to people in an arid community, in an arid climate, when he has abundance, no, I'm not sharing. It makes him not just stingy, but antisocial in like a very like understanding. It's anti-communal, anti-society. He is seen as not good for the entire culture if he is going to hoard.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's interesting from that standpoint to say he's a descendant of a guy that was a big hero. You know, Caleb, I mean, he's looked upon as being, sort of on the right side of things, and here's Nabal on the wrong side.
Fair, yeah.
it's always a capital offense to not share.
Well,
I don't remember any.
It's not. It is not a capital offense. We'll get to that in a moment. But sticking on Nabal's offenses here, what is another reason why Nabal saying no would be looked at very harshly?
Look at
And it has to do with how David introduces himself. So he's like, hi, or he sends servants saying, our Lord David sends us to have a feast with you. Like, give us stuff, let us be included in your feast. What about that? What is David evoking when he is using his name as the reason why these people should be fed?
He's a very important person.
Why is he an important person?
Well, he's been anointed, plus he's winning a lot of battles.
There's one more aspect that
and he protected them. Yeah.
Well, something else.
Okay.
One more thing of why.
Well, when Nabal's herders were in David's territory, they were protected by David.
So, yes, there is the protection element there. Any other thoughts on why David is using his rank as a reason why he should be fed? Think specifically of his role in the kingdom theoretically.
You mean that he's an anointed king, or
no, not the anointed king.
No, not that.
He's a military general. He's evoking his military status. Feed the troops.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because he theoretically is known throughout the land. Remember, they sing of David. Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his tens of thousands. He is asking Nabal to feed the national troops. Not everyone knows at this point that King Saul doesn't like David, so he's still able to kind of throw his military rank out. And by his servants calling him their lord, he is also evoking like an aristocrat status. He is throwing out his rank and title. So why would it be seen as really negative for this guy to be like, David, never heard of him, and say no when he is specifically using both his station in society and likely his military rank to try to get this food?
So you think it's probably not true that Nabal didn't know who David was?
He may not. That is up for question. But if someone rolls to town and says, hey, I was just sent by a general, can you feed my troops? And you say, nah, don't think so.
Okay. Right.
I mean, you can think of like, or in wartime, I'm specifically thinking of like World War I and World War II. The government would regularly eminent domain people's property, people's crops to go specifically for troops. And this guy's kind of saying, nah, don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So with that
Well,
in
it
mind,
marks him as an enemy of the state.
yes, it does.
He declares himself the enemy when he doesn't support his own troops
Yeah.
or the country's troops.
Yeah. And so specifically as a rich person not supporting the troops, how does that make him look?
Cheap.
Cheap. Yeah.
Traitor, a traitor.
Traitor.
So what's our overall opinion of Nabal?
He's not a nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Another Scrooge.
I think it's interesting that they say that the Hebrew word means fool. I think more of what Larry said, Scrooge, more stingy or selfish, but fool.
But he is a fool if he's going against the norm of the people. He's taking a risk, really. Since David kills his 10,000.
Is there a proverb, a fool and his money are soon parted?
I wouldn't doubt it.
So there's really two levels, the cultural faux pas of not providing food, and then the fact that it's military that you're turning down makes it pretty serious.
Correct. Now, here's the thing. Is David being entirely honest here?
Well, his troops aren't starving. I mean, he's feeding them now, and he's asking somebody else to take over what would be considered one of his duties. He's got to be certain his troops are maintained.
Okay, so here I'm going to pause you, Larry. So yes, David is looking after his 400 men. Are his men actually troops?
They're just buddies. They're just pals. They're just like David. They're not really troops at this point in time. Or are they?
No, these are not Saul's enlisted men. These are not official military troops. David is acting like they are, but if you remember a while back when David first goes on the run, he takes a few of his immediate crowd with him. But when he's in the wilderness, it says everyone who owed debts, anyone who was unhappy with the system, anyone who was wanted, gathered around David, and their number was 400. These are 400 people who are not on the up and up with the nation. These are not soldiers with Saul's military. These are 400 disaffected, grumpy people who owe debts.
So if there are so few of them, why are they killing 10 times more people than the government troops are?
So the simple
I
answer
mean,
is
that's an army. I mean, this is David's rolling on his reputation as a general who's winning all the battles. He's the big fighter.
with his band of ruffians. These are ruffians or mercenaries. These are not up and up soldiers. Yeah, Clay, I saw a hand.
I was going to call them outlaws,
Yeah,
and like Robin Hood and his merry band.
great example. Yes, this is Robin Hood and his merry band of thieves. So the other aspect why this is important, how is David feeding his group of merry thieves?
He's been taking the sheep anyway.
If they are actual troops of the nation, there are supply routes of how Saul would feed his troops. Saul takes care of that through the military. If this is not an official military group, there is no official way to feed them.
Okay.
Here is the crux of the actual tension. David is not actually in the military at this point. He is a ruffian with a group of ruffians needing food, and they've been running around the desert. They don't have food. He comes upon a rich guy and he thinks, I can still use my military rank. You all act like you're soldiers. They don't have uniforms. Uniforms are not a thing in the ancient world. They will have some kind of weaponry. So yes, they will look like troops, but they are not officially troops. And he goes up to this rich guy and evokes his military rank and evokes the rules of hospitality.
And apparently this guy knows that he can judge by what they look like, that they're not valid. Is that right?
Ah,
Okay.
I would take a guess and say, while Nabal is doing an anti-communal action, he is also correct.
Okay.
So, what are our thoughts on this whole setup and situation here? Who is in the right and who is actually in the wrong?
Well, if it wasn't clear that to Nepal that this was military, I guess that would lighten the response a little bit. Although the culture is still an issue of why he didn't help someone that asks for some food.
Yeah.
The thing
It wasn't, yeah.
he's not just asking for food. David's asking for a feast.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
So bringing it, I told you to keep in mind that one part about David providing protection. Here's the reality of what we see here. When Nabal goes, who is David? I didn't ask for this. It is clear that David did not talk to Nabal first, which means David, if he theoretically was protecting the animals, was doing so on his own volition. He did not ask Nabal if he needed security. He did not do that, which is why my professor says this is a Soprano style shakedown. This is like mafia protection. I protected you. Do you notice? And there's one part where he even says, I didn't even take any of your sheep yet.
Yet.
I could have just taken your sheep. I could have, and I didn't. You should pay me for not just taking your sheep. Look, I'm asking for it. David is being a mob boss here.
Well, if he's a gangster, it's quite all right to wipe them all out with him.
Well, and the reason David sent 10 men to see the ball was because he wanted to feast, and he's going to get it.
Mhm.
He wanted a feast without having to kill people because that's effort and it's easier if he just gives it to us. So, oh man, now I have to fight. The thing is, David is also clear in this discussion. You see this at the end when he's talking with Abigail. If you look at verse 33, bless your good sense and blessed be you who has kept me today from blood guilt. So
Yeah.
David knows that he is going to incur blood guilt, which is a fairly serious thing that has repercussions. Like, he knows this is straight up murder. But he was just willing to incur the blood guilt because he was mad. So it's not that David thinks this is a neutral act or that he's justified. There's actually a hint that David knows that this is not what you're supposed to do.
Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting that David eventually was considered the greatest king and blah blah blah, and the ancestor of Jesus, but they seem to be making a point about he was certainly not necessarily a great guy.
No, he's not.
He's not like Moses or Samuel,
So
sure.
there's two versions of the stories that we're reading right now. We're not going to read the second version because frankly they're dull.
Yeah,
But you have First and
True.
Second Samuel, then you have First and Second Kings, and then you have First and Second Chronicles. Chronicles,
Boring.
man, when I first read Chronicles, I did not know what I was getting into. This is when I was listening to it on audiobook, and I got done with Second Kings, and I was like, "Hoorah, we're done with the histories." And the first 9 chapters of Chronicles is nothing but a list of names. And it is one name after the next for 9 chapters. It is tedious. At any rate, once the list of names is done, they start with the history of David. And notably, you get the chronicles of David's kingship, but they have eliminated all of the morally gray stories. So this one is not in there because they know it makes David look bad. The thing is, once again, this is a great story. It has lovely story elements to it. So it was probably common. So there's one version of the story where they couldn't leave it out, but they have done their very best to make David look better, which is why they make Nabal look very bad. And this is the story that made me think first and foremost of how much of this book is propaganda. Granted, it doesn't look good, but it doesn't look good only if you read in between the lines. You can tell that they're still trying to rehabilitate David's reputation. So when you think about David being called a man after God's own heart, great PR. Great PR campaign. Love the scribes that put that one there. David is a complicated person. At any rate, David is greeted when he is like gearing up, like, men, get your swords. He is then greeted by Abigail. Abigail evidently overheard the conversation and she made a calculation and she put together the feast and sent it out without her husband's knowledge. So what's going on with Abigail? What is her motivation? What is she doing? The fact that she's going against her husband's wishes and sending food to David.
Well, she's an independent agent.
Well, she also was told that everybody was going to be killed if they didn't get fed, I think. Wasn't that
Yes.
she's trying to prevent a massacre. Well, at least that's the implication of the story. But then she ends up being one of David's wives. So maybe she was looking for a new master.
So go back to verse 3. There's a short description of Abigail here.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
She's beautiful.
How is she described?
But intelligent.
Comely. Yeah, and intelligent. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's cute and she's smart.
Mhm.
So what calculation is Abigail making as a clever woman who evidently has beauty on her side?
Well, if she doesn't do something, she knows David and his men are going to come and slaughter him.
And what's going to happen to her if that merry band of thieves comes in with swords?
Well, she'll probably lose her head.
Or worse.
Or
There are things worse than death.
She'll get raped.
Right.
There's a strong chance of it, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, David had a lot of wives.
Yes, he did. So,
Well, but I think Sue's comment earlier, she may have been tired living with this crab.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not an easy, that a person who's that ugly in their speech is uglier probably in their actions.
Uh-huh.
And so maybe she was seeing a way out.
Uh-huh.
Or she may just have been used to having to make up for the things that he did.
Well, that's a good point.
And a number of preceding transactions. So this was just another one of those bad things that her husband did that she's got to rectify now.
Well, we like to think she was saving her people.
Yes.
Well, he said that he was very uncouth,
mhm.
a
So-
surly, nasty kind of dude.
So here is where I think two things can be true at once. Because I think we have all interacted with couples where one of the members of the couple is a nasty person and the other person constantly is on like damage control behind them. And I think it's easy to see that in this situation where he's a surly man and there was the woman could not initiate divorce here. So she was stuck with this guy. And the fact that she's described as beautiful implies that she's also young. There's a strong likelihood she is younger than this guy. And so we can definitely see that dynamic of the wife trying to do damage control because she knows he's like this. If I am to be feisty about this, I could say that Nabal was painted as a villain to make David look good. And there's a chance that he was not this nasty person that he is written as. And she just made the mental calculation that my husband's about to die. I would rather side with the winner, and I can't save him, but I can save me. And this was just rational calculations in the same way that if you remember Jael back in Judges, when Cicero, or there was like Deborah says, hey, like, go fight this battle. Is his name Jethro? Comes and says, hey, I'll go to battle, but only if you help me, Deborah. And Deborah says, we will win, but it will be by the hand of the woman. And it's not Deborah, but it's a random woman in the camps. And when the enemy general comes by, she stakes him through the head. Even though it was technically the general that her husband supported, she made a calculation that says, hey, this guy's losing. I'm going to kill it so they don't kill me. Similar kind of calculation. This woman knows her husband's dead. She understands the ruffians. She heard the Soprano style shakedown. If he's older, she may be like, he's not going to defend this. He's not going to be able to defend us. I am just going to cozy up to the mob boss because at least I can live. So you can choose which interpretation you want. Either she decided to go with the mob boss because her husband's an asshole, or she just made a cold calculation that her life would be better if she sided with the mob boss.
You know, the DIA has a painting of this scene.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it does. I don't remember who the painter is, but it shows the scene where Abigail shows up with a couple of her maidservants and with baskets of food.
Mhm.
Is
Rest,
anything more said of Abigail later on in the Bible, or does she sort of drop out of the picture once David gets her?
I
Well,
don't know.
she doesn't do a lot, does she? But
I don't. She's not a main figurehead,
she's
Yeah.
but it comes about, or all of
it's
David's wives hold second position to David's most famous wife,
yeah.
which this
I
is
bet
in
you.
some ways a
Yeah.
precursor to, because I think we all know of David and Bathsheba.
Mhm.
If you can see what David's willing to do here, his actions there seem much more in character.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we're getting low on time, so I'm going to zoom us ahead a little bit. Abigail has this long speech where she is glorifying David, and this is all likely made up. Who knows what she said? But this is once again that PR campaign where she is acknowledging that he's going to be the future king of Israel. And that just rehabilitates her image if she recognizes David, sees him as the anointed one, apologizes for the offense for the future king of Israel. This is where the PR campaign is at its top level, is because they are trying to make this look like she is doing the honorable thing where she is maybe not. And David acknowledges it. He says, "Oh, like, thank you for saving me from murdering everyone. You're such a wise woman. Um, like, go to your house in peace." And so Abigail goes back to her house. Nabal throws his party. It turns out by the time she arrives, he's already drunk as drunk can be. So she doesn't tell him then and there what she did, but in the morning when he has a raging hangover, she does. And he has a heart attack and dies in 3 days. Conveniently, he just dies. Um, this is once again, I don't trust the story and the narrative. The fact that her husband just miraculously dies because the Lord punished him for being stingy is very suspicious. Whether she poisoned him or whether David actually killed him, the world will never know.
I thought it said the Lord killed him.
It does. I just don't trust
Right.
it. It
Oh,
says God killed it. I
you
just don't
don't
trust it.
trust the Lord?
The
It says it in
world,
the Bible.
The,
it's just way too convenient for the Lord to just miraculously kill him. That's just, no. Yeah, Sue?
in the next paragraph, they talk about Nabal's insult. So David's felt insulted also. So that's
Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah. At any rate, when David hears that Nabal is dead because the Lord
Surprise.
struck him down, all of a sudden he's like,
Surprise.
"Oh no, this beautiful woman is without protection," and so sends an invitation to be his wife. Because David is so compassionate to take in a widow. Even though, by the culture, she should technically marry Nabal's brother or male relative. She gets passed down the family line in the idea of a levirate marriage. We've seen this before, but no, the future king just graciously takes in this widow whose husband died of mysterious circumstances.
Mhm.
Anyways, so I think she made a good calculation. She evidently, there's a chance she did know this guy was predicted to be the future king of Israel, and she knew she was a good-looking gal, and I think she played her cards right. That's all I'm saying.
Mhm.
And so they have this interaction where she's brought to David. She has her five ladies with her, and she rows and bows down and like does all the pretty language. The thing that's super advantageous for David, though, is the Nabal's property goes with her. So David then inherits all of the sheep that David
Oh.
was protecting. So this, I mean, land goes with women, and so David also inherits this very productive piece of land.
Mm,
Which is the unspoken understanding here is Abigail comes with property.
Huh.
So
And
Oh,
I know.
animals. Herd. Oh my. That is there's going to be a TV show about David, like on one of those HBOs or kind of thing.
Oh,
Did
okay.
you? I saw that in the paper. I said, well, I'm not, boy, I'd stay away from that. But it would be, if somebody wants to ruin their evening, they could watch that, I suppose. I'm just,
which watch is that the movie you're talking about? Or what?
is it a movie or is it, I think it's
Well,
like a
there's a movie on
series.
Amazon Prime of David.
Okay.
It came out and it says in the beginning it's taken some license in the so in the first 5 minutes there are about a couple 10 things that they made up. But it's I didn't watch very much of it because I thought it's kind of I don't know. I don't like biblical sagas particularly because
I don't either.
distorted, but I
I
might go.
want to know if they're willing to make David out to be a ruffian. That would be my one question is like, are they willing to depict him doing this? Or are they polishing his image?
He's still in. Well, I watched about 5 or 10 minutes. In the beginning, he's committed. He's looks like an outcast. He was. That's why they said he was. Yeah, he was an outcast, and he wasn't really an outcast. His brothers didn't like him, but his father was very fond of him, and I thought it was it's kind of like a setup to see him as, rags to riches, I guess. I don't know. We'll see.
That's kind of a Joseph story that the brothers didn't like him.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's funny because there's enough drama in David's stories. You don't need to add anything else. This stuff is like primetime TV right here, just depicting this story. It's anyways, at the very end, we get the description of how many people David actually married. So David also marries Ahinoam of Jezreel. And it is also noted that David's first wife, which is the daughter of Saul, since David has abandoned her, essentially, she gets remarried. Saul gives her to someone else.
So yeah.
Yeah.
That is noted because it becomes a thing later on of like who is she actually married when David comes back to town. So it's at any rate, what do we think of this story of David? Any concluding thoughts with this one?
Let's see, the moral of the story, be nice to the boss and recognize who's boss. That's part of it, is that she recognized that he had promise.
Yeah.
It depicts exactly what Abigail brought with her, like 5 lambs and so many bushels. Did anybody ever calculate how many people that would feed at a banquet?
I don't know. Did not look that up.
Okay.
All right. With the few minutes remaining, let's flip over to the Psalms. I also assigned Psalm 86.
86.
This one, not necessarily connected to the story. This is one of them. I just chose standard issue Psalm of David, supplication for help against enemies. And I was just curious what jumped out at you of this psalm, which is fairly like a fairly standard Psalm of David.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's repetitious for one thing. He says the same over and over again. Save me from my enemies and I'll love you forever.
So repetition is considered the hallmark of good poetry in the ancient Hebrew world. So while today it feels like, okay, you're redundant, get on with it, that was good poetry, is say the same things as many ways as possible.
It sounds like he's praising the Lord. He's almost over praising in my view. But you know, that keeps him in good stead with God, with the Lord.
Mhm.
But he's also asking for a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
he just keeps going on what he needs, this and this protection, and
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
he's pretty demanding.
Mhm.
Like he's the only one around that needs the God's help.
Mhm.
And what he will give in return is his loyalty.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yep, so we talked a little bit last time, and you can see it present here. Last time, the format of the poem was an acrostic poem where they followed letters and they just tried to find sentences of a prayer that would make sense in the acrostic poem. For this one follows kind of the traditional format of a Davidic psalm. So it starts with petition, like, oh, I'm in need of help. Uh, preserve my life. I'm poor and needy. I cry to you. Like you get the initial petition at the beginning. And then in verse 8, we see the transition. It's like, help, help me, help me, help me, help me. God, you are glorious, you are great. And you get that section of praise where it talks about how good God is. So I need help. God, you are fantastic.
Mhm.
And then it returns to the complaint, but as in like, hey, remember, like, you are great. I have issues. Remember that I started with my issues. Um, and there's almost a understanding that it's like, because you are great and I have problems, I know you'll help me and I will praise you. So that is the standard format that we see, especially with the Davidic Psalms. Um, so very much in like verses 14 and 15. God, the insolent rise up against me. A band of ruffians seek my life, but they do not stand before you. But you, O God, are a merciful God and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Turn to me and be gracious to me. So that's where you see, I need help. You are great. You are great. So you have the power to help me. Thank you.
There's also a sense of put down the people who have been against me, put them to shame.
Right.
I think Gary had his hand up. I'm sorry, Gary. I didn't mean to jump right in there.
Well, I just thought it was interesting that it sets up God as the best, not the only.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that make you think if God is the best but not the only?
Well, they're still hanging on to the multiple gods that are in the back room.
It also, I think we've touched upon this before. That is one way to understand um the request to vanquish my enemies. David's not asking for to be reconciled with his enemies, to find a peaceful solution for all people. He is not looking for world peace. He wants his enemies destroyed. And that can be seen in that polytheistic worldview that God, you are the most supreme God. You're not the only God. So the best way to show that you are the best God is to vanquish the other gods. And so if I have enemies, vanquish my enemies like you vanquish the other gods. Show that you and I together were the best.
Yeah.
It's only when you get the development of what we would understand today as monotheism, where the God of the Bible is the only God of existence, everything else are fake and idols and make-believe, that's when we start having the shift away from vanquish my enemies, because, well, if God's the God over every people, well, then God should probably care for those other people too. And so
Mhm.
the vanquish my enemies makes much more sense in that polytheistic setting. But great that you picked it up, Gary. I appreciate that. So one other thing to just add to the Psalms and how scholars think that this was used, like it's very hard to prove it, but a lot of people think that this is their hymn, is the ancient Hebrews hymnal. So like we have glory to God and we pick out different psalms for different services, different weeks, that this is the book of songs, and for different services they would pick out different ones, but it's also at a time where someone is in a rough spot or going through a hard thing, they would be able to pull out the different songs that they could themselves sing in the temple area and help them with their faith. So it's very much that this has a time or place, or it's included with the other songs that are kind of cycled through in their services. That's how they think this is supposed to be used. And so it is interesting if you think about it in how like a song would go and you have your verses and it kind of tells a story a lot like some of our hymns do. So what situation would you think that this hymn should be sung in? Is
This
this your
particular,
just,
yeah, this particular song
yeah, why not?
when they're having a hard time
Mhm.
and they can't do it themselves, apparently. Well, at least
It's
one
interesting.
God on their side.
It's interesting you're talking about its communal use. It's easier for me to see its personal use.
Mhm.
Uh,
Personal.
Are you thinking of a year, part of the church year that this is a, or is that how
No,
you're looking at it? I'm just said
it
that's
was
a
just
very
it was
interesting
just a
question.
question.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
weren't ideas like this used like during World War II, other wars, God is on our side, as opposed to the bad side. He's on the good side. We're the good side. So
Mhm.
God's with us.
Yeah.
So this is one of those that if the king has conscripted you to go fight the Philistines again, this might be one of the psalms that you have that you sing to yourself while you're preparing.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. Alrighty. So any other thoughts for today about David and his merry band of thieves?
But
All right.
in this psalm, he refers to a band of ruffians being against him. So
Mhm.
David doesn't consider himself a ruffian.
That is true. And David's not always a ruffian, or he will soon become technically a mercenary. David's image had needed some rehabilitation. He did some sketchy stuff for a while. So if this final question, if this man is considered a man after God's own heart, what does that make us think about God?
Well, this certainly gives me a view of David that's different from what I've had before.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, he's praised for the beauty of his palace and
Mm-hmm.
and the beauty of his song. He wrote all these psalms
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's sometimes harder when you want someone as a hero. Sometimes we're afraid to talk about the hero's flaws, and David had a
Well,
lot of flaws,
just look at his statue in Rome.
right? All right. Well, shall we close with a word of prayer? Let us pray. Loving God, if David is someone that you cared for and we are told that you loved, gives me hope that there's room in your love for me as well. Because God, today we looked at all of David's flaws and his shortcomings and the ways that he maybe didn't do things the way they should be done. But we know that there is mercy and there is grace, and we ask that for ourselves as well. Because we know we do not always act the way we want to. Sometimes our best is still far short of what you call us to be in the world. And so help us understand those shortcomings. Help us be able to take other people's points of view and be able to see that, yeah, maybe we do have places where we can improve. So be with us this week and in the following weeks until we are able to gather again together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chris. Everybody have a great week.
Okay, thanks, Chris.